in West Kowloon Cultural District. I think that is desirable. It will benefit all parties. I hope the administration will reconsider this. So I speak.
Mr. Pt2. Thank you, President. This bill seeks to implement a three-stage plan to ban ivory trade by 2021 December. And the penalties will be increased to better deter smuggling and illegal trade of ivory. Now, many people think that protection of elephants should be supported. As I said in many Bills Committee meetings, I emphasize that I support protecting elephants, and I object to world trade on ivory. And for smugglers of ivory trade, penalties should be increased. And many bad elements or smugglers of ivory trade are pushing the market to the extent that it is now in a crisis, and the image of the trade has been tarnished, and there is stigmatization of the legal trade traders and practitioners, and they will be dealt a blow. And I will be objecting to this bill. It's not because we don't want to protect elephants. It's because the government has been ignoring the innocent traders who will be dealt a blow, and their demands have not been acceded to. It's unfair and unreasonable. It goes against the basic clause provisions to protect personal property. Now we have some 300 license holders, and they have raw and worked ivory. And these have come to Hong Kong before 1990. They came to Hong Kong through legal channels approved by the AFCD, registered under the AFCD, and they have possessed the license to possess, LP. And this is very different from and not very related to the poaching activities, to my understanding. In 1990, Hong Kong implemented ivory trade ban, and the trade has been hoping to sell off the ivory ASAP so that they can switch to other businesses. But how come that it has not been sold off over the years? For these 700 tons of ivory, it is the stock is now 70 tons. Is it the case that a number of illegal ivory products have been mingled into this batch? You said way back in 1990 to them that there should not be any import and export of ivory. They thought that this is the only stock that existed in Hong Kong. That's not the case, because the government still allows the import of pre-convention ivory, those in the 70s and 80s, to come to Hong Kong and be re-exported. And they don't need an LP to have the trade in Hong Kong. So for the ivory in the market now has not decreased in volume, but rather have increased in quantity. And so that has affected the stock of ivory that came in before 1990. And that's why they have not been able to sell off all their stock in the past 20 years. The government has been very lax in regulating pre-convention ivory. And have you checked their certificates? How many have you checked? And have you tried to verify these certificates with the accreditation authorities overseas? There are so many loopholes which can be exploited by people and smuggle such ivory into Hong Kong, which are sold at a very low price. And they've been snatching the market away from the legal traders. So whether it's illegal ivory or legal ivory traders, their stocks could not be sold off. And the reason is because the government has been embarking on such policy. The government is to blame. The government has been allowing pre-convention ivory to come to Hong Kong, and the gatekeeping and the law enforcement is too lax. And of course, sometimes customs will seize illegal ivory trade at the customs. But the government is now shifting all the responsibility to the legal traders in Hong Kong, and they are taking a cross-the-board approach to put a ban. And the livelihood has been affected. It's not fair. President, during the scrutiny of the bill, many of my colleagues have proposed a number of solutions to the government, including asking whether the government can buy back the stocks of ivory. Of course, we're talking about the registered and legal ivory, and also maybe allow them to continue to sell pre-convention ivory. And also, even so, as mentioned by Mrs. Regina Yip, maybe display the ivory at ivory exhibition in a museum. The government refused to heed these views. Without the government is not giving out compensation, or you said that you would help retrain the practitioners. There are some 100 craftsmen in the trade, most of them over 60. How can you do retraining for them? Are you asking them to do online business? It's not feasible. It's not practicable. And what you do will mean that their products will become worthless and all their properties will be gone. Hong Kong is a capitalist society, and we have the rule of law. Private properties should be protected under Article 6 and 105 of the Basic Law. The government said that it will ban the trade. It will not expropriate the ivory, and the traders can still hold or possess the ivory for non-commercial purposes. So there's no way that you will compensate them. I don't think it's a fair comment. Let me say example. Maybe a Hong Kong person will buy stocks and gold to preserve the capital, and then all of a sudden maybe the government will legislate and to say that the gold and stocks can only be possessed for non-commercial purpose. You cannot trade on them. The gold should be appreciated at home, and the stocks cannot be exchanged for cash. Is that reasonable? The government said that the ban will not affect the value of the ivory, and I think the government is deceiving not only itself but members of the public. The government said that there is no compensation in other jurisdictions for the trade in Hong Kong. And you say that if you give them extra payment, then they will send out the wrong message. It will lead to intensification of poaching of elephants, and ivory will be smuggled into Hong Kong. While the government has the duty to convey the right message, you should think of ways to do it. But you can't do it at the expense of sacrificing the interest of the trade, and they are not allowed to trade, and you shift the responsibility to them. It is not reasonable. Every jurisdiction has its own approach in doing things. You can't just copy the methodology in overseas to Hong Kong. Basic law protects private properties, and the government is bound to uphold that spirit. During the scrutiny of the bill, the government has been saying that this is a practice of the international community. They are not going to make compensation, and the requirements are stringent, etc., etc. So we should follow all the legislation overseas. But then in the course of scrutiny, many members have mentioned and asked you for examples of why Hong Kong must follow overseas jurisdictions. Now, towards the last two meetings of the Bills Committee, you said to us that Hong Kong's approach is more stringent than that in the EU and in Europe. Well, there is intra-EU trade, and the EU can also export ivory. And how come that Hong Kong adopts this cross-border approach? And why are you asking the Hong Kong's ivory traders to bear the brunt? This is unfair. Hong Kong must protect the underprivileged, uphold the interest of the minority. There are some 300 licensed traders in Hong Kong, but does it mean that the number is so small that we can ignore them? Hong Kong business sector is on the weak side, and I don't think a lot of people, members, will support the ivory traders here. But it doesn't mean that the government should side with majority. That's not reasonable. You should look at whether the direction is right or not. I reiterate that I am object to international trade of ivory, but then the government has previously issued license to traders who are selling pre-convention ivory before 1990. Why don't you allow them to continue to do so? And you're now moving the goalposts, and you allow them only 3 years to sell off the ivory. The prices will plummet at least by 50%, and the people and the ivory traders will be full of grievances. This morning, it was very cold. A lot of the elderly people were in the demonstration zone, and they were holding placards. They have nowhere to turn to seek assistance. The government do something about the remaining ivory. You have the registration. I'm not asking you that you should relax your requirement, allow the ivory to come to Hong Kong continuously. Then that will lead to poaching of elephants. But the question is, in Hong Kong, we do have existing stock, and you must think of ways and means to help people sell off the stock. And that is the real way to help them. So, President, I will object to this bill.
Mr. Jimmy, thank you, President. The crux of the problem is ivory trade. However, this is a matter of perspective. From a protection perspective, the ivory ban is certainly worth supporting, but from a commercial perspective or the protection of private effects, we might not need to completely eliminate ivory trade. The bill should focus on the future as well as treasure the trade of ivory crafts. If the bill is passed, the all commercial uses of ivory would be banned by 2021. So this is a one-off approach, and I'd like the government to consider whether there are alternatives. Ivory crafting is an old craft, and Hong Kong's ivory trade reached its peak in 1970s and 80s. In 1989, since an international trading ban was imposed, there were still 670 tons of ivory, and by 2016, we still had more than 70 tons of ivory, and that is the crux of the problem. According to the Ivory Association, their stock were obtained legally before 1990. They have nothing to do with the illegal poaching that is going on right now. So from a business perspective and the perspective of protecting private effects, should we completely ban ivory trade? For the antique ivory owners, should they be given some sort of compensation, or would the government buy back such ivory for exhibition purposes in the future? Regardless, if the bill is passed, this will help eliminate the negative label of Hong Kong as the biggest ivory trading hub. But from a business perspective, the government should provide support measures in order to support the old ivory traders. The government should also look at alternatives to ivory so that the ivory craftsmanship can continue. Dr. K.K. Kwok. Does any other member wish to speak? Ms. Claudia Mo. According to the spirit of modern civilization, when you talk about protecting endangered species such as African elephants, they are constantly hunted or poached for their tusks, and this is certainly inhumane.
Certainly, the majority of us will undoubtedly agree to this. We will certainly agree. But as I was listening, the non-democratic camp, meaning the loyalists or pro-establishment members, I find some of them really hypocritical. You say you love the country. Beijing leaders, Mr. Xi Jinping, announced to the international community 3 years ago that China will close all import, export, or other businesses in the market. And 1 month ago, meaning on the 31st of December 2017, the Chinese government has closed down all ivory trading spots and the entire market. Hong Kong is such a small place, and are you saying you disagree? What are you saying? This is an international convention. National leaders announced that they would comply with it loud and clear. You talk about moral high ground. Are you trying to criticize President Xi Jinping? That is something I cannot believe I'm hearing. Talking about elephant poaching. Don't they know that originally nobody really cared, but it was because of China, and also, of course, Hong Kong is the biggest ivory market. There is a skill called ivory carving. There are many wild animals in Africa, so we hunt them. Many decades ago, elephant poaching was like killing a few thousand elephants every year. Nobody really paid attention. Why is it that they are now near extinction? It is because at the peak, 33,000 were killed every year, or one killed every 15 minutes. And they die horrible deaths. They were the tusks were cut off them with so much brute force. And somebody asked rather naively, saying that without the tusks they could still survive. Well, that is very naive, or you may say you are innocent. Of course, that is not possible. You are killing them by taking away the tusks. Hong Kong has acted later than Beijing already. This is really an act of the state. And Hong Kong still dares to object. You say you do this for the people and you disagree to stopping the poaching of elements. And you say, no, we are trying to protect human property. The pro-establishment camp would always say, pocket it first. Okay, let us pocket this first. Let us pass the bill. We should align with this act of the state. This is from Beijing. We should have a total ban on ivory trade and the entire ivory market. Let us pocket it first. The ivory carving art is valuable in the carving, not in the ivory.
郭家麒議員，你可唔可以將你個牌？
Dr. Kokaki, can you remove your placard a bit? President, I speak in support of the Protection of Endangered Species of Animals and Plants Amendment Bill 2017. President, this bill came too late. In fact, in 1975, there was already ivory trade regulated in 1975, and in 1990, a total ban on international trade was imposed. Theoretically, starting from 1990, the world round, including Hong Kong ivory traders, knew that if they continued with ivory trade, they are going against the international convention and also the international trade ban imposed in 1990. The SARG was lagging behind so much, and was only in December 23rd of 2016 that there was this three-stage plan to regulate ivory trade. These three stages, including stage 1, ban on import and re-export of pre-convention or post-convention specimens. Stage 2, ban on pre-convention ivory, import and re-export, and then regulating the through licensing for pre-convention elephant ivory. Stage 3 would take effect on 31st of December 2021 unless under exceptional circumstances, possession for commercial purposes of all elephant trade would be banned. Many members from the business sector talked about how unfair the ivory traders are being treated. Let me quote some information from the AFCD. Up to January 2016, the stocks with license is just a 37 batch, 77 kg in weight. For these 200 batches, 76% were in small quantity, less than 100 kg, and these 76% were in domestic premises. They were not likely to be sold. What I am driving at is that the amendment is not something that happened suddenly. It's not a too aggressive an exercise. It has taken a long time, and I have reason to believe that the government has been under tremendous pressure from the business sector, so it just presented the bill in December 2016. But regrettably, after so many years of deliberations and discussions, and up to today, many ivory traders are not yet prepared. And this is a far cry from what we are led to know. We know that the business sector is not, the business people are not very dynamic. It's not that case. Business people are very nimble. And if we talk about a sunset industry and, for example, and for products which do not have an international market, they will not plow in more resources and manpower into that industry. And in 2016, the government introduced this bill, and they would have expected then that in 5 years' time, such ivory trade will be banned totally. And I don't agree with this, but then the administration said this, we have to agree unwillingly. There is a grace period of 5 years still. And this period lasting up to 2021, in the next 3 years or so, I believe that internationally there will still be a lot of poaching of elephants and harvesting of the acquiring the tusks and so on. This is no secret in the industry. Many ivory traders are using or exploiting the loopholes in the laws now and continue to import ivory and claim that these are stocks. Why the stocks are not sold out all the time? Because every time there is new replenishment of ivory through smuggling. So they will not tell you that they have sold off the ivory, because if they say so, then there is no reason why their stocks will increase. So if that is not being dealt with, then there will still be stocks all the time. So this is really exploiting the loopholes in the law. Now, the government and the AFC have not been enforcing the law stringently. It's difficult to do that unless, say, you using some laser technology and try to mark every batch with a laser mark. In other words, label each batch of existing stocks. So there shouldn't be any new stocks. If there is new stock found, that it must have been smuggled into Hong Kong, and then penalties to be imposed on such stocks. Acting Secretary, maybe you can respond to this. From now until this implementation of Stage 3, can you be more rigorous in your law enforcement to prevent those who are exploiting the loopholes and engage in illegal acts like smuggling ivory into Hong Kong? Some members say that the EU is not fully regulating the ivory. Why have to do that? Now we have to understand that the largest ivory market in the world is our motherland. Is not something new, and is a historical legacy, really. In the palace, in the ancient times in China, during the feudal times, ivory was considered a very precious type of material and used for carving and so on. And when they did that, they could never see what's happening in Africa, where there is elephant poaching. And we know that every year, over 1,000 elephants were killed and poached. And even in the protection zones, the rangers were killed. And we know that this ivory trade is full of blood in a way, and we're talking about the blood of the elephant and the rangers. So it's full of bloodshed. We can't bear up with this kind of illegal trade. Now, does it mean that after the bill is enacted, the ivory traders have no business at all? Now, if you go to some handicraft shops, you will see that the shops are not displaying ivory products that much. They are using the mammoth elephant tusks to come up with the handicraft products. These other species has become extinct, and relatively their price will not be lower than that for elephant. But then the scarcer it gets, the pricier, the higher price it will fetch. So the illegal traders are using all sorts of loopholes to try to jack up the prices of ivory products. I think the government must do more, not in the form of compensation. I definitely do not agree that public monies should be used for compensation. As early as 1990, the Finance Committee has allocated $5.8 million to help the ivory traders to transform themselves and to engage in other businesses. So the government should do more in helping the traders to switch to other professions, and it can even do more, say, in the local arts circle, or maybe through chambers of commerce and trade unions, and say the AFCD, the Business Facilitation Office, etc. Try to encourage people to, say, use materials which are legal for producing handicraft. So maybe this is a new way for these practitioners. I believe that if our traders have the capability to switch to other types of handicrafts using legal products, they have a wealth of experience of handicraft, that might be a way out for them. So I hope that after the bill is enacted, the government must do more encouragement and maybe allocate more funding to help with the traders and the craftsmen so that they can get subsidy You can provide them with courses, training courses to help them transform or join another business. This is something that the government must do. And we should try to inherit or keep such handicraft experience and skills. And colleagues said that this is going against the basic law. But, President, contravention of the basic law is not something new these days. Carrie Lam, our chief executive, our Secretary for Justice, who is having UBWs, they can casually contravene the basic law. And Agnes Chow is disqualified for local election. Now, talking about contravention of basic law, I don't think the bill goes against the basic law. But if you are really concerned about the basic law, well, please try to look at how ridiculous the government has been acting these days. It has totally ignored the basic law, and it's depriving Hong Kong people of the right to stand for election and be elected. Second, about ivory as private property. Now, from now to the end of 2021, there is still some time. And I believe that ivory traders who have been in the trade for a long time will have their own ways to dispose of their ivory. But if that really can't be done, the government must consider ways to help them, not in the form of compensation, but rather we know that the many elephants have been killed. Can they be sort of for educational purposes? Let me be clearer on this. Say in museums and exhibition centers, they may need ivory, say, to highlight the very bad practice of elephant poaching. Should we keep some of it for educational purposes? This is something the government can consider. If, say, in the motherland, the mainland, has legislated on ivory trade, doing it ahead of us, and Hong Kong is an international city, we should not be lagging behind what's being done in the mainland. But on this particular piece of bill, we have lost in a terrible way too. The motherland, mainland, is the biggest market for ivory, and they have earned the most profits. And they are now they're going back to the right track to legislate to ban ivory trade. How can we trail behind so much? If we have further delays, and we should be shameful of ourselves. So to conclude, President, we must legislate ASAP, and when that is being done, the government must also undertake other works. So, for example, raising awareness of the public on the cruelty of elephant poaching. I have reason to believe that the bill may be enacted. I'm still worried that illegal ivory trade will continue to Hong Kong, even if the government is trying to enforce the law, unless, say, the government pledges that law enforcement will be stepped up. I'm looking forward to a reply from the government official on this point.
Mr. Wong Ting Kwong, President, as many people know, my nickname is Elephant. So I absolutely support the Protection of Endangered Species of Animals and Plants Amendment Bill 2017. But while supporting the bill, we must also face up to reality. The protection of elephants is a different matter from the ivory trade. We will certainly support the protection of elephants. We must ban the poaching of elephants, and we must punish such actions. However, we cannot ignore the traditional ivory craft and the trading of ivory products. Of course, it's true that without trading there won't be any killing, but due to a historical reason, we cannot simply just ignore it. After the 1970s, ivory trading has been gradually phased out in Hong Kong. And in the 1970s, one of my friends, Mr. Ao Ming Chi, from an ivory manufactory, he owned a very famous manufacturing firm for ivory. And however, my friend gradually realized that the ivory trade has become peripheral. So the company, the Nathan Ivory Manufactory, closed down. He had a lot of craftsmen who were not young. So while those staff were laid off, my friend offered his ivory stock to the ivory craftsmen so they could bring them home. So that is what happened. We are against poaching and trading. Since the 1990s, of the licenses issued by AFCD, enforcement work has been casual, and with the right proof of origin, imports were permitted. And that's why some local ivory traders exploited this loophole. That's why we face a lot of difficulties enforcing these regulations. But we should not ignore our support towards ivory craftsmen. I have no empathy towards the ivory traders, but for the ivory craftsmen, we must take care of them because they are getting on quite a bit. The government told me in meetings that these people can enter different trade, but to be honest, they are not getting any younger. Well, Dr. K. Kwok talked about cow's horns or cow bones. They are not relevant. Carving ivory and carving cow bones are different. Cow bones could be carved by machine. For ivory, it must be carved by hand. So if you ask them to undergo training at VTC, well, who are you trying to kid? And you are talking about entirely different trades. So this is just not realistic. However, these craftsmen still possess stock, so you should give them some options. A ban on ivory trade and protection of endangered species are certainly correct, but we should also take care of these ivory craftsmen and their future livelihood. We are not talking about a lot of people, so shouldn't the government do something? I'm sure this bill would be passed, but after the bill is passed, the government should consider what they have to do in follow-up. We still have a few years of grace period left, and you should be well prepared. You should think about the livelihood of ivory craftsmen and workers, so you should consider the issue from a holistic manner. Today we are talking about protection of ivory. I'm not sure why Claudia Mo talked about the loyalists or the opposition. Well, Dr. Kwok Ka-ki had a good speech till he started talking about Agnes Chow. So I was quite surprised. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. President, I speak in support of the protection of endangered species of animals and plants, Amendment Bills 2017. This bill has been long overdue, especially for an international city like Hong Kong. I know that most citizens in Hong Kong, including myself, have always assumed that such a ban on ivory trade in the 21st century is something that needs no debate. Or many may even have thought that such a ban was already in place here. Unfortunately, ivory trade is still one area where Hong Kong is actually ranked high up there in a negative way. I still remember vividly some of the scenes from the Bills Committee during a public hearing in which a couple of rangers from Africa came all the way to Hong Kong to testify, and they were telling the stories of one of their fellow rangers who was recently, at the time, murdered in cold blood in Tanzania by illegal poachers. Yet, in the same hearing, local Hong Kong ivory traders were telling their side of the story, how ivory art, craft, and skills must be preserved, and how it took them more than 20 years to get rid of their ivory stocks down, but yet locally held stock might have actually gone up, and it was none of their responsibilities, and so on. Not only did they turn a blind eye to the killings of animals, elephants, and ivory in ivory trade in Africa, some of them even showed a very scornful attitude toward the conservationists and even the African rangers. I remember I was so angry at such display of selfishness and so ashamed that some Hong Kong people, Hong Kong business person had sunken to such a low and despicable level that I had to apologize on their behalf to our international friends. And I had to tell our international friends that these people's attitude were in no way representative of what Hong Kong people in Hong Kong really thought about ivory trade, and that we were solidly against poaching activities and the killing of elephants and people in Africa, or in the dubious name of protecting some sort of art and craftsmanship. But I think this is not the kind of art and craftsmanship that we as a civilized and internationalized community in Hong Kong should see any value in preserving. And I want to tell my electrical colleagues from the business community that trying to label these vested interests, being ivory traders, as the victims, I want to say I myself also being a part of the business community, and the business people that I meet are all in support of a complete ban and no compensation. I'm afraid this time you do not represent the views of the majority of the business community in Hong Kong. In the Bills committees, there were also considerable debates on the effectiveness of the international ban on ivory trade. Indeed, some people over the years have argued that a legal ivory trade may be more effective in saving elephants. However, it is clear that after considering all the evidences that are in, the international ivory trade ban is still the most effective tool we have to save our elephants from being massacred. Some said that ivory ban approach has made prices gone up and poaching more lucrative. But how much does such claims is really evidence-based, and how much of it is just an excuse made up by those who stand to gain the most from ivory trade? However, many academics have reminded us that legal trade really backfired badly in 2008, including people from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. In 1989, the United Nations supposedly already banned international ivory trade, but it came at a time when Asia's economy was growing and increasing wealth in the region still drove up demands. Since 2008, elephant poaching came back in a big way because of new buyers in Asia. In 2009, there was a one-off global commercial sale of 102 tons of stockpiled ivory. It generated more than 15 million US dollars, money that supposedly went to elephant conservation efforts and local African communities. Supposedly, further sales would be banned. But what happened was this, what happened after this supposedly one-off commercial sales? Actually, it led to bigger demands, including from new buyers and new traders. How do you tell the traders to stop? Do you tell them to give it one last try and then stop for good? No, they will come back for more, legally or illegally. You tell them to stop, period. Dr. Andrew Seguya, Executive Director of the Uganda Wildlife Authority and member of the African Elephant Coalition, said there is no evidence that ivory sales provide any benefit for local people or elephants. Legal ivory trade cannot help save elephants. In fact, this is not only true internationally, and as our own experience in Hong Kong in the last 10 to 20 years could show you clearly, the ivory traders will come back for more and more. You give them a stay on the ban, and they come back for asking for a longer period of time. You give them money or other means to compensate for their stocks, they will come back for more. This is Hong Kong's experience. And if we have anything to offer the rest of the world, we should tell them we learned it the hard way. No extension, no more compensation, because we have already seen how the ivory traders will keep on coming back for more. I heard some colleagues in our chamber asking for the government for leniencies for the traders to sell their stocks. But I think the 5 extra years of extension to take care of their stocks now is already too long. Or I heard also one of our colleagues here even said that the government should acquire the stocks and put them in our museums. I say no, I don't want to see these dubious art anymore. If I have my say, I say burn them like opium. So I thank the government for sticking to its original position of no compensation. This is one time that you did not bend to the vested interest, and you did it right. The fact is, elephants are dying. No, they didn't die on their own. They were being killed. In 2016, a most extensive count of any wildlife species was conducted on African savanna elephants in what was called the Great Elephant Census. Technology was used, and almost half a million kilometers of distance was aerially surveyed, and the conclusion was that there were only about 350,000 African savanna elephants left. That was down 140,000 since 2007. 9 years, more than a quarter, gone. And they are gone, they're dead, and they're killed. The researchers were unable to survey some of the other forest elephants because they are being covered by the forest. They are smaller and more reclusive, and it would be more difficult for the research team to use aerial surveying techniques to count the numbers. But if we include them in the surveys, the result could only mean that the number of elephants that were killed in the last 10 years were even higher. To African officials, the fact that these declines are definitely due to poaching, encouraged by the ivory traders. There is no doubt about that. Ivory trade is a blood trade, period. Over the last 20 years, despite stepped-up efforts by conservationists, the amount of seizures of smuggled ivory and the size of the carved ivory market has become bigger and bigger. That is the evidence. Many legislators here have expressed that elephants are a beautiful species, loved by our children of all generations. But elephants are also intelligent. There are research showing that they are possibly even highly conscious as a species. The kind of kinship and family-based relationships among elephants is something that biologists and scientists have found to be very clear among the elephant herds, and the elephants are indeed part of a very small and select group of mammals with intelligence and consciousness. Losing this species, let alone losing them in a very violent way, will actually mean that scientists will have one less species to study and understand how human beings developed our own intelligence and consciousness. In this sense, while the elephant seems to be very distant from us Homo sapiens as a species biologically, in another way, we human beings are indeed very close relatives to the elephants. Why is Hong Kong lagging behind in banning ivory trade? I think the biggest reason remains our mindset and tendencies to get bogged down by the demands of the vested interests, the trade. While international ivory trade is illegal, some countries permit internal sales because it is more difficult to ask or inquire closely within a country's border as to where the ivory tucks came from. It then is important to remember that China, the biggest ivory market in the world, with an estimate of over 70% of the ivory sold, has started a ban on ivory sales inside of China since the end of 2017. This is the one country that we have to uphold. According to even international standards, reports have come in that China seems to be very serious about banning ivory trade. Not only that shops are being closed, celebrities have come out to support anti-ivory propaganda campaigns, including celebrities such as Yao Ming, the basketball star. But where are the new shops and workshops being set up now after China, Vietnam, and others of China's neighbors? Yet we cannot use that as an excuse to say, well, somebody is doing it, so we can continue. We should not think to that level. Hong Kong has our international commitment to uphold and our international image to be protected. In addition, we actually have a duty to make sure that the Chinese ban, or our own country ban, will be successful with our help, not with us dragging the feet of the Chinese policymakers in trying to make sure that the Chinese and Hong Kong ivory bans are as successful as it can be. Outside of our chamber, Mr. President, in the Legico protest area today, a large group of Hong Kong people, including many children and young people, had gathered and they were chanting, "Stop Hong Kong ivory trade, 禁止香港象牙貿易." That is their core. That is our core. That is the core of the African elephants. Today, finally, Hong Kong is meeting the global standard of banning ivory sales. There must be no turning back, and there will be no turning back.
Does any member wish to speak? Mr. Ray Chen. Thank you, President. I speak to support the Protection of Endangered Species of Animals and Plants Amendment Bill 2017, and that is I support the phasing out of ivory trade in Hong Kong. Human beings should be held responsible for lives of elephants. Elephants face the threat of extinction, and the population is slowing very often because of the relevant trade. Well, the shorter the supply, the higher in demand, and the higher the prices you can fetch to get income. To profiteer, hunters and merchants have been killing elephants with no concern for their lives at all, just for their trunk and ivory. We talked about justice and human rights, and also we respect life, and we should not really let the majority have the say. I'd like to take this opportunity to say, to tell government officials and members that when we come to the suppression of the minority and people who are being bullied. Well, it's not a matter of allowing the majority to have the say. Whether we should protect their rights should not hinge on whether the majority supports it, and we should not let the majority prevail, because if you do a head count, of course elephants would stand to lose, because they are near extinction. Even they have the rights to vote, they will not vote for human beings. But now people have already awakened to the sense that we need to protect elephants who cannot speak up for themselves. We should at last do something for them, and we should defend their right to life. We have to respect their right to life. Because of commercial activities of human beings, they face the risk of extinction. They've been subject to tremendous pain, and we really have the responsibility to make amends, although this is already too late. Still, late is better than never. We should minimize or end all unnecessary. In fact, there is nothing that is necessary, because if we ban the whole ivory trade, every year 2,000 African elephants are being killed because of poaching. And therefore, it is an urgent task that we ban ivory trade at once. Hong Kong has always been a place where import and export of ivory takes place, although licensed traders are allowed to trade pre-convention ivory. But from time to time, we heard of seizures by the Customs Excise. Last July, there was a container arriving from Malaysia, and it was said that it has frozen fish. In fact, 7,000 kilogram of illicit ivory was confiscated. Last year, 14 kilograms of suspected ivory products were seized at the airport. Why would people risk illegal activities? Because Hong Kong and also the mainland terminated, actually the mainland and neighboring cities terminated terminated ivory trade last year, but in Hong Kong we have to wait for a few years. So there is a market, and there money to be gained from ivory trade. So people will smuggle ivory products into Hong Kong where there is still a market, i.e. Hong Kong. We have to protect elephants. Therefore, to protect them, we must end all sorts of human trading activities to stop any demand for ivory, so that we can ensure that elephants and their counterparts elsewhere will not be subject to the threat of extinction. Since 1980s, we have been a center of ivory trade in Asia. Although it was banned, importation was banned in 1990, but we had a big stock of ivory imported in Hong Kong before that. And many people have accused Hong Kong of using newly imported ivory to pass as pre-convention ivory. As a result, there is a market here risking the lives of elephants. There has been undercover aid operations. In controlled by operation, is found that post-convention ivory has been traded, and using carbon-14 analysis, it was found that those ivory products were obtained after 1990. So they were actually post-convention products. Hong Kong is a black spot for illicit ivory trade, and we are now being under surveillance. And then in 2013, 33,000 kilograms of ivory products have been seized. That is close to half of the stock we have here. To show the government's determination to ban ivory trade, starting from May 2014, all the confiscated ivory products, that's close to 28 tons, they were incinerated at our Qingyi waste treatment incineration center. But we must end all ivory trade, there must be no distinction between legal and illegal market so as to protect elephants. When it comes to protecting lives and elephants, there is no controversy. The greatest contention here is whether the government should, when ending ivory trade, provide compensation to legal ivory traders in Hong Kong, or whether they should be compensated on the basis of the inventory they have, and to compensate people who are in possession of ivory products. I've listened very patiently to arguments from the government and from members from different political parties. However, we haven't come to a very clear-cut conclusion because these ivory traders, they have their own stories. They have their point to a certain extent. So even today, they are still sending emails to us. Although I have decided on my voting inclination, but I have read their emails very carefully, one by one. For instance, with passage of this bill, the value of ivory will become zero. Now, the trading value is zero, but for those who are in possession of ivory, well, there is a memorial value, and it may be heirloom of your family. The value will still remain. And here it says it will bury our ivory trade. Of course, as an industry, yes, our objective is clear. I believe after voting, the decision will be to eliminate this trade. They talk about having nothing to support them in their twilight years. I think the Labor and Welfare Bureau should address their plight. Some members talked about retraining for these traders. In fact, it would be hard for them to get another job. Even for an ordinary worker who is 60 or 70, it would be hard for them to find a new job. But when it comes to their lack of financial means to support their retirement, whether they are a byproduct of the ban, I think they should be looked after by the government, and whether we should compensate them on the basis of the quantity they have. But this will be a trap. This will be incentive for these traders to add illicit ivory to the legal one so that they can get the maximum amount of compensation. Although there is carbon 14 analysis to determine the date, but the cost is high, and there will be confused messages sent to the market, and this may lead to further poaching of elephants, and even guards of this elephant reserves might face risks. Their lives may be threatened. I know there are people who would not stop to risk their lives to protect these elephants. They may be rangers of elephant reserves. Some of them were traders. They, for whatever reasons, might be they have turned over a new leaf, and they have spent the second half of their life to protect elephants. So if we are to give them compensation according to the quantity they have, this will be extremely dangerous, because the people may poach as many elephants as possible in order to get the compensation. Now, if we are to go down this route, then all poachers around the world will be poaching elephants, causing more to die as a result. And also ivory that is not being sold outside Hong Kong may smuggle into Hong Kong so that people can get higher compensation. So a policy intended to protect elephants may be counterproductive, and this is very ridiculous. And other proposal is a lump sum compensation, or rather, they don't call it compensation, they call it a lump sum allowance. Is that possible? Is that feasible? I have think about this, and my conclusion is against it, because this will send a very wrong signal to the world out there that ivory in Hong Kong is eligible for compensation and all will find a way into Hong Kong. This is very horrifying, because in the past it was once rumored that there would be amnesty for illegal immigrants into Hong Kong, and then people from the mainland flooded into Hong Kong. And if this message is distorted and then sent to Africa, people would tend to err on the safe side, and then everything will be distorted. They will think that, well, ivory can fetch money in Hong Kong, and then they will kill more elephants, and Hong Kong will be the culprit, and a well-intentioned move may harm the elephants as a result, and therefore we support the government's position. There should be no compensation for any inventory held. And as for the transformation of our traders, well, in the 1980s, the trade was at its peak. Now this trade is declining, and it's not that they will lose their job starting from tomorrow. And with the implementation of the convention, people's awareness has increased. So we have fewer buyers. We have about 100 or so such traders in Hong Kong. 2/3 of them are over 60 years old. Of course, if these craftsmen have no way to make a living, then the government is duty bound to help them to change to a new occupation or to get retirement protection. And that's why we need retirement protection. It's just not just for ivory craftsmen. Now, if their situation, as it is stated in this email, they don't have any financial means to support their final years. Now, if they think that they only have some ivory products to maintain a living, then this is very tragic. I'm not asking you to compensate these people for their ivory inventory, but if they really have their lack of means, the government should help them. I don't think the number of such craftsmen will be greater number. Now, so long as you don't compensate for the ivory they possess, now I don't mind you help them to maintain a living, so long there is no wrong message sent to the world that ivory in Hong Kong can receive compensation. We are happy to pass the bill today to send this message to the world that we are determined, and there is unanimous support in this council that we should end the ivory trade in Hong Kong, so that Hong Kong will not be a black spot for ivory smuggling, and then because there are consequences that we all will have to bear.
Mr. Roy Kwong, thank you, President. Now, we can judge a country by the way it treats animal, in whether it's civilized or it observes ethics. Now, for animal rights protection, I think last year I moved a motion, and that was probably the first time when we talk about animal rights, and that motion was supported across the parties in this chamber. We know that animals can't speak, but they still feel, we can feel pain and they can feel pain. We're afraid to die. Animals are afraid to die. The rights have to be defended. And it will be us who make the effort to defend them. Well, some may say elephants are far away from Hong Kong, but not at all. In a market, this market ivory could be ornament or is used for other purposes, but behind this ivory market, what is happening to elephants? there are about 400,000 African elephants around the world now. Since 2001, every year about 3,000 elephants were hunted and killed. Why? Because of the ivory on the elephants, they command a price. So the people have the hunters have to first kill the elephants to get to the tusk, because the tusk is attached to the skull of the elephant So that's why the poachers must kill an elephant and remove the skull, and then they have to remove half of the face of the elephant before the tusk could be removed. So behind beautiful products, we are talking about many bloody stories. If you ever have a chance to travel to Africa, you see plenty of these faceless corpses of elephant. Is Hong Kong related in any way? Yes. There are many organizations which say that if there's no trading, then there's no killing. True. We need to strengthen protection of elephants. At the same time, we need to stop the ivory trade. Now, from some data of an international research organization on wild animals, in Hong Kong, 33 tons of ivory were seized in 2013. But in Hong Kong, we have a stock of just over 100 tons. From 2009 to 2014, 18 tons of ivory was seized. That's equivalent to 2,692 tusks, or dead elephants, rather. So here we're talking about cases of where smugglers have failed, and that's why you managed to catch them. But so you can imagine, we're talking far more than 2,000 elephants. So what's happened? How come Hong Kong is now the subject of criticism? How come we are dubbed the smuggling center of ivory? From media reports, we know that the media has approached the lawful traders, and who were being very honest. They said, on the mainland, smuggling is cracked down on hard, but in Hong Kong, as long as I just need to register for say 5 tons of ivory, and if I still have a stock of 4 tons, then that's illegal. In other words, inspection here in Hong Kong is far from adequate. And when that's the case, so that means there is a major loophole in Hong Kong. That's why other members already told you Hong Kong is made transit center for the black market of ivory. It's because we do not have a proper system in place to deal with that. And that's why we're here debating this issue. For signatory parties to CITES, Hong Kong signed it in 1989. At the time, there were 413 licensed traders trading in pre-convention ivory. But the problem is now it's hard to determine whether the ivory being traded is lawful or not. From my limited understanding, if we want to confirm whether the ivory in question is real, it's authentic or not, and whether it's a pre or post convention, that process is difficult. It's about using the carbon-14 tests on DNA. In fact, the government is still considering whether it should bring in such a piece of equipment that costs us several tens of millions of dollars. Okay, maybe someone is in possession of some lawful ivory, but I also have unlawful ivory, and since you can't test my ivory, so I can continue with my trade. And we're talking about a huge trade value. So that's why everybody flocks to Hong Kong, and Hong Kong has become a black market hub. We're talking about huge quantities of ivory being traded here. So this is necessary for us to legislate here in Hong Kong to say no to the ivory trade. When there's no market, there's no trading, then there's no killing. This is true. And you might question whether it is enough if we just do it in Hong Kong. No, we're talking about a global effort. Every country and every city is working hard on it. Now, for Hong Kong, we are a black market hub. So we have a serious problem. That's why we need to catch up with the latest arrangement. Starting from the 1st of January, there's a complete ban of ivory trade on the mainland. At the end of last year, China announced a total ban on ivory trade. And since the announcement, unlawful ivory seize has dropped by 80%. That's inspiring. So China has done it, and it's done it faster than we have. Now, so they're sending out a strong message that is, if we are strict with enforcement and legislation, we could see immediate results and changes. In Hong Kong, we're still waiting. It is really necessary for Hong Kong to respond to this. Why? Because from UN figures, we know that for smuggled ivory trade is the fourth largest smuggling trade after drugs, ammunition, and so on. Now, Hong Kong is a major black market hub, so we have to close the door. Otherwise, you'll be dubbed a murderer of elephants. I'm sure we all agree we need to protect elephants from such atrocities. We don't want elephants to die because of ivory smuggling. I'm sure we all agree. So what we need to do now is how we could actually achieve that. I don't think we need to ask if anyone is in support of protecting elephants, because I don't think anybody would say no. Now, for the Protection of Endangered Species Bill 2017, Amendment Bill 2017, starting from the 31st of December 2021, there will be a ban of ivory trade, and it's actually nothing new. In 1990, we started to ban ivory trade, and then various measures were enhanced, and that shows the government has always been wanting to tighten the ivory trade ban on ivory trade. And in the interim, there are about 2 or 3 decades allowed for traders to sell off their stock. Now, I think we have allowed plenty of time. If we delay it anymore, even by a day, that means the market stays and we continue to help it. And then we will have to take up a huge responsibility. As I said at the beginning of my speech, animals don't speak. But from the figures, we see there is a loophole, so we can't just ignore it. Now, there's another contention in the bill, is that the government won't pay compensation to traders. Since UN endorsed the CITES in 1975, there's always been control over ivory trade. First, the ban applied to Asian elephants, and it was extended to African elephants. For 26 years, the government allowed traders in Hong Kong to sell off their stock. It's probably the longest period for clearing stock in history. So the government should not pay compensation, otherwise it will send out a wrong message. As other members put it, it's a wrong message to pay compensation. And so we have to tread with great care and caution. So there are elephants killed for their ivory, and then rangers' lives are under threat because of such poaching activities. So we need just to do one thing, that is to stop ivory trade. So we won't let you say that my trade is lawful, because then it's difficult for us to tell what's lawful and what's not lawful. Because now people are telling us, well, what I'm doing is lawful because this is pre-convention ivory. But actually, of course, we all share the same objective. That is, we don't think elephants should be killed for their ivory, so we need to do something. In 2016, and in the policy address of C.Y. Leung, paragraph 207, he expressed concern about elephants. But now we're already in 2018, without realizing it probably. The time flies. But if we can do something now to offer protection to elephants being killed in Africa, then we should pass this piece of legislation. And then we must send out the message that elephant or animals do have feelings. Actually, among elephants, they can communicate among themselves through an interesting means. They stomp their feet. And then they'll be sending out like codes, and then they could communicate among themselves. So they do feel. When a hunter kills an elephant in front of the other elephants, well, elephants certainly feel something. And here we are in 2018. We are now taking the first step. As I said, I quoted Gandhi. We judge a city by how it treats animals, and then we know whether it's ethical or civilized. Now, for animals, for the community, the government, and everyone, we all want to protect animals. We respect the right to live. Now, later on, of course, we're moving to the voting on this bill. So we're just doing the very least we can do, that is to stop the trading of ivory, so that we could curb the black market, so there will be no more trading of ivory, and then the killing would stop. Now, elephants can't speak; they won't be able to come to this council to give their views. But I think across the parties, we are all speaking to save elephants here. So let's hope we can take the first step. Does any other member wish to speak? Mr. Eddie Chu. Madam Deputy. I think the scope of our debate today is rather narrow. On this particular issue, I think we share common views. The government and the community as a whole have the duty to protect animals. and we should also work with the international community to stop the poaching of wildlife elephants. So what we're debating here really is about whether the government should pay compensation in phasing out ivory trade. I think the government has repeated this message in clear terms. That is, if we pay compensation in any forms, that would send out a wrong message. Especially to countries where elephants live. I think Mr. Ray Chan's analogy was totally apt. Let's say if there's a rumor on the mainland that Yakult could cure disease, immediately people will be hoarding Yakult. So we can fully appreciate the rationale behind this policy decision of the government. If any member is against this bill, then the key is really about refuting this viewpoint of the government. And let me repeat this viewpoint. That is, if there is compensation in any form, it will send out the wrong message to poachers in Africa, and that will lead to more killing. Mr. Charles Mock quoted some studies. If we try to legalize ivory trading again and say that for certain period trading is still allowed, in fact that will lead to massive killing of elephants. Because then that will boost global demand with Hong Kong as a transit center. At Bills committee meetings and at the meeting today, members from the business sector have never advanced a clear or accurate reason to refute the government's point. Now, just now, members spoke against the bill, and he focused on the argument that even in the European Union there is not a total ban, so that's why some of the ivory comes from the EU. So their governments are not as strict. Why do we need to be stricter than them? Or there is citing of Article 105 of the Basic Law to say this is actually private property. Now, I do not wish to dwell on those two viewpoints, apart from the one on the Basic Law. Just now, Mr. Dennis Kwok has already spoken from the legal point of view. That is, you cannot cite Article 105 to stop the government from enacting this piece of legislation.
Now, without this issue regarding the Basic Law, and I think there is no way for the European Union to validate or invalidate this article, because to plug this loophole, what we need is not to use this loophole as an excuse to not to introduce a ban on ivory trade. What we need to do is to plug this loophole so that we can stop elephant poaching, so we can minimize the chance of products made from elephants poached from coming into Hong Kong. And anyway, this doesn't answer the core of the question. These two viewpoints cannot address the core question. That is, if the government dishes out compensation, there will be more poaching of elephants in Africa. And if members are united in saying that they love elephants and that we should stop elephant poaching, then I think we can wrap up this debate. Because there is no clear argument to rebut the government's viewpoint. Madam Deputy, in the second part of my speech, I'd like to make some observations. They may not be directly relevant to this bill, and in fact, regarding this bill, I can say that when we enact legislation to impose a ban on certain human behavior which we don't think is necessary, and by that I mean, say, luxury spending, and I understand around the world it means three things. Ivory for decoration, for example. You will still survive without ivory decoration. Shark fins, well, will we die of not having shark fins? Of course not. Third point, fur coat. Well, Mrs. Regina Ip may come down in a minute to tell us that it's a different matter because there are ways to make fur coats without resorting to the same means. Well, for the international animal rights movement, indeed, these are the ideas that they uphold because these are unnecessary luxury spendings. We should not allow them, especially in the face of some endangered species coming to extinction. Madam Deputy, well, when we debate on ivory, shark fins, fur coats, the arguments are really simple. Say, for shark fins or ivory, well, the community is rather small. After years of publicity, we've cornered them, basically. In terms of public image, they give a very negative perception. So in this Legislative Council, by and large, we have a consensus already. I hope the government will not drag on their feet. What about shark fins and fur coats? These are not necessary spending. These are luxury spendings, which bring so much harm to animals. When will you enact legislation on the other two? But, Madam Deputy, on the other hand, I have some deep reflections. I think we are hypocrites. Imagine human activities. Well, if the activity is something that is common, that is practiced by a lot of people, but at the same time is something that brings harm to animals, then perhaps we will not be so steadfast in putting forward our arguments. Let me give you one example. Plastics. We know that now in the sea there are a lot of plastic beads, and be it turtles, fish, and birds feeding on marine animals. Well, their digestive system is full of plastic. But without plastic, Hong Kong will be in big trouble. And let me stretch my argument a bit further. If we go on Facebook, we see green groups advocating that something be done to stop global warming with the icon of a polar bear. Well, if global warming continues, then in a decade's time, polar bears will become extinct. Global warming is nothing but the doing of human beings. It's an accumulative consequence of our actions. And not only polar bears are affected, a lot of other species are affected by global warming as well. We are affected, especially those living in poorer regions. They suffer from global warming. And yet I don't see our government or our legislative council taking proactive steps to do something about the crisis, which is imminent. I don't want to spoil everyone's fun, but I'm just saying that if, in order to tackle the ivory trade ban, we are spending 2 or 3 decades before we finally reach this step, then in terms of the whole government, in the face of an imminent environmental crisis, the government is taking a totally opposite stance. Well, I am worried that by the time we introduce a ban on hunting of sharks, then the problem will be will worsen. I support this bill. I hope the bill can be passed as soon as possible. Mr. Holden Chow.
Madam President, first of all, I have to thank the relentless effort made by my DAB colleague Elizabeth Quad, who began to scrutinize this issue many years ago. No doubt elephants are endangered species, and elephant hunting is indeed notorious activity. It's brutal, it's unscrupulous. And for the purpose of acquiring the ivory, countless elephants could be killed, which is against our humanity. China has already taken a strict measure to ban the trade of ivory. And Madam President, I have the benefit of learning the dire consequence of not banning the ivory trade. More elephants will be killed, and even more people will be killed too. Over the years, the problem really comes to a head, and we are bound to take appropriate action. And Hong Kong, as an international city, we can't afford that our reputation being tainted by turning a blind eye to the subject problem. So today, I think not only Elizabeth Quad has a pat on her back from the public, but so does the government, which is eager to take on board the advice and take appropriate action. Madam President, I support the Protection of Endangered Species and Animals Bill today. Thank you.
有冇其他議員想發言？我現在請環。
If not, I now call upon the Secretary for the Environment to reply. Then the debate will come to a close. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. First, I want to thank the Chairman, Mr. Kenneth Leung, Deputy Chairman, Ms. Elizabeth Quad, and members of the Bills Committee set up to scrutinize the protection of endangered species of animals and plants Amendment Bill 2017, and also the efforts of the Legislative Secretariat for their hard work in the past few months in examining the bill so that the scrutiny of the bill has been smoothly completed. As pointed out by the administration, in June last year, when the bill received its second reading, the bill seeks to by means of a 3-step plan, phase out the local ivory trade and to increase the penalty against the smuggling and illicit trading of endangered species so as to honor our international obligation under the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species and to respond to the strong aspirations from the international community to ban ivory trade. Currently, we regulate the protection we regulate the protection of and we implement CITES by means of the protection of endangered species of animals and plants ordinance. By and large, local trade in ivory is banned in Hong Kong, but then import and export of ivory can still be allowed under some circumstances. For instance, pre-convention ivory and some elephant hunting trophies and ivory carvings and also ornaments are also allowed with a certain permit under the under CITES, and for those who are in possession of license to possess, they are allowed to keep ivory. Poaching of African elephants has aroused concern over the world, and this has increased the imminent threat of extinction of these species. And there are stronger calls from the international community to phase out this trade. In 2016, a resolution was passed at the meeting of the Conference of the Parties to CITES, recommending that all parties and non-parties in whose jurisdiction a legal domestic market for ivory exists, that is contributing to elephant poaching or illegal ivory trade, should take all necessary legislative, regulatory, and enforcement measures to close the domestic markets as soon as possible. The SAR government has the duty to enhance regulation of and to ban ivory trade so as to support and echo international efforts in the protection of elephants. We have a three-step plan. The first step is to ban the import and re-export of all elephant hunting trophies and those remaining post-convention ivory items. The import, export, and export of which are currently permissible under CITES. This will help to discourage killing of live elephants, for example, through spot hunting. Step 2, ban the import and re-export of pre-entry ivory and subject the commercial possession of pre-convention ivory in the local market to licensing control similar to the existing control on post-convention ivory 3 months after the ban in step 1. This will further prevent possible laundering of illegal ivory. The third step, ban the possession for commercial purpose of all ivory, including pre-convention ivory and post-convention ivory, by restricting the issue of a possession license. After implementing of these steps, the local trade for ivory will be completely closed down. When these 3 steps are introduced, the current exemptions permitted under CITES, which are limited to specific and stringent circumstances, including scientific studies, educational enforcement, as well as personal or household effects, except for tourist souvenirs, will continue to be in force. And the possession of ivory for non-post ivory can still be held possessed. This is in line with international trading practices and will not deviate from the original intention of protecting elephants and stopping poaching. In order to provide a sufficiently strong deterrent against illicit wildlife trading, including ivory, and to send a clear message to the international and local communities that the government is committed to the protection of endangered species and to combating wildlife trafficking, we propose to increase the penalties under the ordinance by the amendment bill. Currently, a person committing an offense with respect to the illegal import, introduction from the sea, export, re-export, or possession of Appendix 1 species is liable on conviction to a fine at level 6, and that is $100,000 and imprisonment for 1 year. Higher penalties are currently imposed for offences relating to specimens of Appendix 1 species committed for commercial purposes, and that is a fine of $5 million and imprisonment for 2 years. For Appendices 2 and 3 species, a person committing an offense with respect to illegal import, introduction from the sea, export, re-export, possession of them is liable on conviction to a fine at level 5, that is $50,000, and to imprisonment for 6 months. If the court is satisfied that the act in respect of the offense was carried out for commercial purposes, the convicted person is liable to a fine of $500,000 and to imprisonment for 1 year. To ensure that the penalties under the ordinance will provide the necessary deterrent against illicit wildlife trade, it is proposed to impose uniform penalties for both commercial and non-commercial summary offences. We propose that a fine of $5 million and 2 years of imprisonment will be imposed for summary offences concerning Appendix 1 species, and a fine of $500,000 and 1 year of imprisonment for summary offences concerning Appendices 2 and 3 species. Separately, we propose to promulgate a new set of penalties for offences convicted on indictment. We propose in the bill that a fine of $10 million and imprisonment for 10 years be imposed for indictable offences concerning Appendix 1 species, and a fine of $1 million and imprisonment for 7 years be imposed for indictable offences concerning Appendices 2 and 3 species. We propose that the increased penalties take effect on the same day as the bill takes effect. We note that there are views that the ban of ivory trade would cause ivory traders to suffer tremendous loss, and there are proposals that affected traders should be given compensation. For instance, for the government to acquire their inventory or to provide ex gratia allowance to them. As we have said at Bills committee meetings, providing compensation to the industry may send out a wrong message and stimulate or escalate or intensify the proliferation and the poaching of elephants, and there may also be a laundering of their illicit ivory, and this will deal a heavy blow to our efforts to protect elephants, and this will greatly undermine our international reputation. We have not heard of similar compensation in other jurisdictions when they introduce similar measures, and there is no reason for us to deviate from international practices. And according to a survey done by AFCD in 2016, the ivory trade is not the mainstay business of people in possession of ivory. Many of them have transformed to auto trade or trade in commodities not subject to any control. Since 1990, we have gradually banned ivory trade. We are proposing a total ban on this, and the effective date is the 31st of December 2021, and there are 5 years for the industry to prepare for the ban. They can carry out business transformation or dispose of the current inventory, and we believe there is sufficient time for this reasonable measures, and therefore there should be no compensation for the trade. And for craftsmen that may be affected by the ban, we will explore possible assistance in the light of their needs. And then the IFCD is consulting the ivory craftsmen, and we will provide information we will give them the necessary assistance in due course. Some members refer to the Basic Law. Article 105 of the Basic Law is about compensation for lawful deprivation of the property, and such compensation shall correspond to the real value of the property concerned at that time and shall be freely convertible and paid without undue delay. Our analysis is that unless once the property is being affected, it has no other meaningful use, and then the control has stopped the use of the property. Otherwise, it is not really acquisition of the property. So we are not really acquiring the property. The ivory possessors can continue to possess the ivory. There will be no change of ownership, and any meaningful use of the property will not be banned. For instance, they can continue to possess, to donate, or to exhibit such products, and they can use it for craftsmanship and cultural purposes. And we're of the view that our ban is not against the basic law and also related human rights provisions. And on the 7th of July last year, the administration gave a very detailed explanation of our views. And we note that some members of the view that as we introduce the ban, we should take more stringent enforcement in smuggling ivory into Hong Kong. For instance, we should crack down on all sorts of smuggling activities into Hong Kong for laundering purposes. The AFCD has noted this view, and it is going to review its ivory regulatory regime. Together with the Customs and Excise Department, they will launch a series of refined measures to tighten control of the situation for ivory with a possession permit. A label will be attached and photos will be taken of such products, and the weight will be taken for record purposes, so that there will be no new illicit ivory coming to Hong Kong. As the local trade is gradually phased out, the AFCD and C&ED will continue to take very rigorous enforcement actions. Madam Deputy, because elephants face a real threat of extinction, we should introduce reasonable measures to stop the ivory trade, and our measures are well justified. The proposals can address the public international community's concern on the subject, and there are suggestions that we should close down all domestic market, and therefore we have to send a very clear message to all people involved in this illicit trade. We should close down our domestic market, and we should show our determination in combating the smuggling of wildlife. With these remarks, I urge members to support the second reading of the bill so that we can gradually phase out the local ivory trade and to enhance our ability to crack down on smuggling of ivory.
And I'll put the question to you that the Protection of Endangered Species of Animals and Plants Amendment Bill be read the second time. Will those in favour please raise their hands. Mr. Ted Hui claims a division. The division bell will be rung for 5 minutes.
開始表。
Voting begins. Please check your votes. If there are no questions, voting is closed. Display the results. 53 members present, 48 for, 4 against. The question is agreed by majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. Protection of Endangered Species of Animals and Plants Amendment Bill 2017. Council now becomes Committee of the Whole Council to consider the Protection of Endangered Species of Animals and Plants Amendment Bill